And welcome into the locker room. Scott Marsh with you. We have a very special guest in studio today. We're glad to have the voice of the Sharks here, Dan Rusanowsky. Dan, thanks for coming up to Sacramento.
Love coming to Sacramento. We have so many fans in this capital region, and I have to tell you that it's exciting to look forward to another exciting year of Sharks hockey on the radio here in Sacramento. We appreciate everything you guys do.
We're looking forward to bringing it. And obviously, it was another great year of Sharks hockey. Came up a little bit short, losing in the Western Conference Finals. But what a playoffs it was. 3 7-game series. The unbelievable series against Vegas, followed up by the dramatic win at home against Colorado. Came up a little short against St. Louis, but obviously it had to be a fun ride this year.
I'm telling you, Scott, if the Sharks beat the St. Louis Blues, they win the Stanley Cup. I don't think there's any doubt in my mind. And what drama we had through the playoffs. I can't think of a Stanley Cup playoff that was as amazing as this one, certainly for the Sharks, but really for the NHL. Think about it. You go to a Game 7 against Vegas. The team was down 3-1, came back. They had the home ice advantage, which they desperately needed. And in Game 7, they fall down 3-0. And you get a controversial 5-minute major penalty. You have your captain, Joe Pavelski, carted off the ice, never to return for the game and for the next series until a little bit late in Game 7. And then you've got 5 minutes of power play, and you've got 4 goals scored. I have never seen anything like that in my life. And I think Sharks fans are going to remember that for a long time, but not just that one round. Then you've got the Colorado series where the captain comes back in Game 7, and all he does is he gets into his patented spot and tips a Brent Burns shot home. That got the crowd into hysteria. And, of course, a great series against St. Louis. They ran out of gas basically because of injuries. But other than that, I think everybody can feel really proud about the season that they had.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a fantastic year. And you touched on the Pavelski. I wanted to get into that a little bit because that might have been the moment in the NHL series or season, and certainly in Sharks history, one of the unforgettable moments unforgettable moments ever. What was it like for you broadcasting that? It had to be surreal. And where does that rank in terms of some of your all-time favorite Sharks moments?
Well, certainly at the top. I mean, I think you can look at certainly going to the Stanley Cup final in 2016 against Pittsburgh and all of the memories from that. Seeing the Stanley Cup wrong team, right trophy carried around SAP Center by the Penguins, even though the Sharks didn't win, that was something that many Sharks fans never thought they would ever see.
Yeah.
And so that was a good stepping stone. But I think that was eclipsed certainly by what happened in the Vegas series and the Colorado series and the run that they had this particular season. Again, you mentioned Joe Pavelski. He's leaving our team in San Jose, becoming a member of the Dallas Stars. So what a way for him to have his final moments in Sharks uniform, at least for the present moment, to have that amazing, dramatic return back to the ice to wave at the crowd when he wasn't playing, and then they get back on the ice and make the contributions he did. It's something that we're going to remember, and certainly he's going to be sorely missed. But having said that, his loss is certainly Dallas's gain for this season, but the Sharks have so much in the gas tank, so much in the arsenal, to be able to deal with the loss of his 38 goals. And I think that they will be able to do that and have to be considered one of the favorites in the Western Conference again this year.
No doubt, as you guys have been for so many years, talking with Dan Rusanowsky here in the locker room. You lose Pavelski, and obviously that is tough, like you talked about. Of course, there is a hard cap in the NHL, so you had to save some money to sign some of the other guys. Timo's coming back. Erik Karlsson is coming back. We're hoping the captain, Joe Thornton, will be coming back as well. So you're bringing back a lot of the pieces from last year.
It's looking good for Joe Thornton to return, and he wants to play. So I think they're going to work that out. Pretty sure that's going to happen in the next few weeks. Obviously you have to be judicious as to how you handle your money, but I think that the Sharks management has done that for so many years, and it's one of the reasons why they've been able to compete for so long. Timo Meier, a priority to sign. He's going to be on this team for a long time, and they signed a contract that was very creative, actually. They could have signed him to a longer-term deal, but what they did was they signed him to a 4-year bridge deal at a very good number, at $6 million a year. The last year of that contract is a $10 million payday. So that means at the end of it, when you get to a position where he's going to be a free agent, he's still a restricted free agent because he's so young. So what they'll do, obviously, is qualify him at the $10 million, making it effectively a 5-year contract. And if they decide to extend him any longer after that, they could. But I think that that's an interesting way to make it difficult for another team to provide an offer sheet. And on the other side of it, make him an integral part of this team, which he's become over the last year. That's one. Erik Karlsson, what an impact he made when he was healthy. I think that fans are going to realize how valuable he is when he goes through an 82-game season without some of these injury mishaps.
And you talked about those injuries. That was a big one coming down the end of the regular season and through the playoffs.
Yeah, but the fact that he's signed for $11.5 million a year for the next 8 years makes it a little more difficult to get everybody in, getting back to the Pavelski situation. So, but he's a difference maker. He like Brent Burns, makes a difference for teams and games. And the way the NHL's played these days is they're generating much of their offense from the guys on the point. And so the Sharks have two of the best. Yeah. And they can, with Marc-Edouard Vlasic being such a good defender, they've got top 3 defensemen right there amongst any team in the NHL. I'd stack up the Sharks' defense against all the teams.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's right up there with anybody else. All right, the schedule is out.
So
let's talk about that. Let's look forward to next year a little bit. You open up with a back-to-back against Vegas, and I know the Sharks have a lot of rivalries. Has Vegas become the best rivalry now based on what's happened the last couple of years?
I don't think they're going to be too many bits of sweat left in the bodies of any of the players after those 2 games, October 2nd in Vegas and October 4th at SAP Center for the home opener. But you know what's funny, Scott? Just before that, there's 3 games in a row against Vegas. The last preseason game the last couple of years has been against the Vegas Golden Knights in Las Vegas at T-Mobile Arena. And it's an interesting thing because every time I look at that game, I think about the first one 2 years ago. And that was
after the Vegas Strong and
that happened that day.
Yeah,
it happened that day. The Sharks had a 5 o'clock game in Vegas at T-Mobile. The shooting that took place, where 58 people tragically lost their lives, was right near the arena. It was right at the country concert, and we got to the plane. We flew home right after the game. And we're landing, and we're starting to look at all the things that are happening in Las Vegas, and we couldn't believe it because had it been a 7 o'clock game or a 7:30 game, we would have been leaving the arena right about when the shooting started.
Wow.
So, the rivalry is there, but certainly there's a lot of feeling for the people in Las Vegas for what they went through, and so the Sharks are attached to that.
Yeah.
Then that is an event that somewhat sadly but realistically became a way for the team to help bring the city of Las Vegas back together again.
Without a doubt.
The first big event that happened in Vegas after that was a game.
Yeah.
Was their first ever game. So I think that with the 2 playoff series that the teams have had, the Pacific Division, the proximity, the fact that it's easy to get to and from Vegas, so you have fans of both teams going to both arenas. I just think that it's one of the most exciting rivalries in hockey right now. And these things ebb and flow. L.A. is still L.A. Anaheim is still Anaheim. Those are probably the big 3 in terms of the Sharks' biggest rivals at present, partially geographically and partially because of all of the years of competition.
Yeah, we had a former promotions director who was on stage during that whole tragedy in Las Vegas. He got out unscathed, very thankfully. Fortunate. But yeah, so many people touched by that. Vegas is obviously a great rivalry. And the way they've restructured the standings now in the playoffs, that you play within the division first before the conference, those rivalries are even more magnified now because the points really make a difference in setting up for playoff seedings.
There's a method behind Gary Bettman's madness, isn't there? First of all, to create the parity with the salary cap system so that when you get to the playoffs, any team can win the Stanley Cup. I think that's one of the great achievements of the last couple of collective bargaining agreements, that any team feels that it has a chance. And there are other sports that you don't feel that way.
Yeah.
Certainly Major League Baseball is not like that. I'm not sure about the NBA, but the NFL. So I think that the NHL has done a really good job of having the parity. And then, of course, the intensity of the schedule that you talked about. I mean, beginning the season with a back-to-back, home-and-home series against teams that just gave everything they had against each other the year before, and with all the drama, is just a great way to start. And then the usual road trips. They play everybody on the East Coast once. And I think that the St. Louis Blues rivalry now is also one that
a big one.
It's underrated, because here's something that's a bit of a trivia question. Did you know that the Sharks have played the St. Louis Blues in more playoff games than any other team?
Wow, I never would have guessed that. I would have said maybe Detroit.
No, it was for a while, but this last year, the Sharks or the Blues passed the Red Wings, Calgary, and Colorado also.
Wow.
Colorado is another team,
Okay.
ironically, that they played this year that are one of the bigger rivals, but it's softened a bit because of the intensity with the Southern California
Right.
teams. So I think it's interesting to see that. And, historically, we've had good rivalries, too, with Calgary and with Dallas because of playoffs.
Yeah.
When you play a team in the playoffs, it just ups the ante. And then when you're in your division and when you have divisional playoffs, it's really amazing to see.
It is amazing. Of course, the Blues, the defending Cup champions, beating Boston in 7 out, coming off the 6-game
You had to say that,
Western
didn't you?
Conference. I did, because it's trying to set up my next question.
That's all right.
Are they the favorites to win again next year? You talk about parity. As you look forward to next year, who are some of the top favorites going into this thing?
Well, I think it's easier to look at teams and say who's really improved themselves at this point, because over the course of the rest of the summer, there are still going to be other changes. I really honestly think that Colorado has done a heck of a job in becoming a team that's relatively young, with maybe the best player in the game in Nathan McKinnon. He's that good. He's
he is so fast on that ice.
I say if McDavid is today's Gretzky, he's today's Lemieux.
Yeah.
And, he's big, he's strong, he's fast, and he's got all the skills, and he can play a lot of minutes even though he's a forward. So they've got him, but they've also got through their lineup really talented players. They added Nazem Kadri from Toronto to give himself a little sandpaper in the middle. He's somebody that played for Pete DeBoer Jr., so that'll be interesting. And he and Joe Thornton have gone back. I don't know if you remember, a couple of years ago, they fought in the face-off circle, and he ripped out a piece of Joe's beard. That was a fascinating moment that you can watch on YouTube. But it's interesting to see how they've really built their team a little bit better. I think that with Joe Pavelski sadly going to Dallas, he's going to make them a better team, and they're on the verge of having something going there. They've got a great defenseman in Miro Heiskanen. They've got a goaltender, Ben Bishop. They've got Pavelski and Tyler Seguin and Jamie Benn. So they're talented.
And they were a part of that great 7-game series themselves in the playoffs, yeah.
Right. And you've got, staying in the Western Conference, Vancouver will be an improved team. Dallas, again, as I said. St. Louis, we already mentioned it. They're going to be right there again. And the Chicago Blackhawks are a team maybe to watch out for, too. They've made a couple moves over the summer. They picked up Calvin DeHaan from the Carolina Hurricanes. They just made a move and picked up Zach Smith from the Ottawa Senators. So they've got Patrick Kane. And when you have a guy like that,
say no more.
You say no more. I mean, he's one of the great players in the game. So on the Western side of things, those are some of the clubs I'm looking at. I think LA and Anaheim will be better than they were. And Arizona's improving. They almost made the playoffs last year.
That's
so
right.
Here we are going through the entire West.
It's everybody.
I haven't even said the Winnipeg Jets yet.
Yeah.
They're a team that were kind of a disappointment with Nashville this past year. So I want to see how they recover from that. A lot of times it does happen. But the teams that I mentioned, I look to the ones that have improved their stock a little bit better and could be on the verge of another step forward, because the parity, it's hard. You can't really predict who's going to be a top team, and that's part of the beauty of it. The same is true in the East.
Yeah, well, the one thing we can't predict, the Sharks are going to be right there in the thick of things again.
No doubt. And there's no doubt in my mind that the Sharks are one of the teams that should be favored in the Western Conference to at least challenge for a position for the Stanley Cup. As we've seen in the NHL, that doesn't mean you're going to waltz through any first-round opponent. You're not going to have that happen to you. And I think, though, that with players like, you look at the top four on the D, you've got Erik Karlsson, you've got Brent Burns, you've got Mark-Edouard Vlasic, and you probably, if health brings him back at the start of the year, Burnsy's partner, Radim Šimek, who I think was a big addition, a big loss to the team when he was lost for the year down the stretch. Getting him healthy back at training camp will be big. And then you've got Brendan Dillon. That top five, I'm telling you,
as good as it gets.
You're not going to get any better than that.
Yeah.
Up front, even though Pavelski's gone, Logan Couture has come into his own as a top player in big moments. Tomas Hertl had an amazing year last year, 35 goals. And you've got Evander Kane, who scored 30. He's going to take another step forward. You've got Meyer. And so the Sharks have a lot of depth, and they've got some young kids coming over from Europe, first of all, but also people that they've drafted that I think are ready to make that next push. So that gets back down to the rumors about Patrick Marleau as to whether or not he comes back. He was bought out by the Carolina Hurricanes, as it turned out, after Toronto moved his salary with his permission to the Hurricanes. when the Hurricanes said, we want you to stay, he said, well, I don't really, family's important to me, and they're going to be in San Jose, so I'd rather be on the West Coast. They said, fine. They bought him out. They got to the salary cap floor, so that they did Toronto a favor. They picked up a first-round draft pick, and they got to a spending level that they wanted. But I think that there's a possibility he could return, but I don't necessarily put too much stock into that just yet, because he's going to be 40 years old, and Joe Thornton's going to be 40 years old. And so we'll have to see how some of these younger players who have earned that opportunity to get a chance do in training camp, and then we'll see how it all shakes out. So that's the way I look at it.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, but it's going to be another great year. Dan, before I let you go, and I'm sorry, I should have brought a copy of the book in, but I want to talk about the book that you've written too, because it's awesome.
Thank you for saying that. It's called If These Walls Could Talk, San Jose Sharks. It's part of a series that Triumph Books has put out over the last couple of years, and they have a variety of teams. There's a book I remember seeing the Milwaukee Brewers did one, the Detroit Red Wings did one. There are a whole bunch of teams that have done it. And the whole concept is to have somebody that's been with the team a long time, take fans behind the scenes and tell some stories, not necessarily out of school, but almost some things that people would otherwise not get. And I told a few stories of that. Worked with Ross McEwen, who's an excellent writer with the San Francisco Chronicle and a couple of other publications, the Hockey News. And so we kind of split up some of the chapter work, then we edited it all out together, and it was really a fun experience. But that's something that people can get at Amazon.com or wherever books are sold. You can always order it. It's called If These Walls Could Talk, San Jose Sharks. And it was a project I really enjoyed doing. We'll tell stories, everything from what happened after the Sharks beat Detroit back in 1994, and how we were actually sitting on the tarmac trying to figure out which way we were going to fly, whether it was going to be to Toronto or to out west. So as it turned out, the Calgary Flames lost to the Vancouver Canucks in a triple overtime game, which we were waiting to have end that night. And so we turned right and went to Toronto. And the Sharks played the Maple Leafs in round 2 that very first year. That's an example of one. Another story is one that I've told you is my favorite story, which is the last chapter of the book. And that is where, because of the game of hockey and because of what I do, I was able to help somebody find his birth father.
Yeah, that's
amazing. That's a pretty dramatic story. So that's one thing that people can get if they go to Amazon or they go to where books are sold and pick it up.
Yeah, it's a great read, and I encourage everybody to get that. Dan, we look forward not only to the Sharks this year, but of course carrying the games and getting to hear your golden tones on the broadcast right here on Sports 1140.
I really appreciate that, Scott. You know, my thanks to everybody in Sacramento who loves hockey and follows the San Jose Sharks on the radio especially. We certainly are there for you. And if you happen to be one of those groups of people that drive to SAP Center, more power to you. We've got a lot of people from the Sacramento region that love the Sharks and come to the games, and we're looking forward to that and having people listen on Sports 1140.
Dan, really appreciate the time.
Thank you.
All right. That's Dan Rusanowsky here in the locker room.